Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. This is Gray Matter, and I'm your host, Leighton Gray. Well, one of the most interesting public figures that we can think of is British author J.K. Rowling. She has to be the most successful author of the past 30 years. She sold incredible numbers of books. And of course, the whole movie series was also incredibly successful. Many people have seen the movies and they haven't yet read the books. I've had the pleasure of reading several of her books. And we have today on the show a man named Solomon Schmidt, who, if you can believe it, is only 22 years of age and has already written 10 books, one of which we're going to be talking about especially today. It's called A Pen to Change the World, The Life of J.K. Rowling. Welcome to the program, Solomon Schmidt. It's great to meet you.
You too, Leighton. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so J.K. Rowling, she's this incredibly successful public figure, author, I guess movie producer, if you could call her that. But she also
Yeah.
says all these really interesting things like when you tell a woman she must pretend a man is a woman, you're asserting the right to control her speech and
Mm,
perception of reality
mm.
while also trivializing and devaluing her female specific experience. You're asking her to agree that woman is a concept man can embody at will.
Mm.
Uh, of course, she writes so beautifully, and she has the talent that all great authors have to use words
Mm.
so effectively, and
Mm.
it's so powerful when she tweets these things. But it's interesting, Solomon, that somebody of her stature and her obvious wealth and her following would kind of stick her neck out and enter the fray of a very controversial topic. Is that typical of what you've learned about her and your experience in studying her and studying her work?
Yes. 20 years ago, it wasn't the far left canceling her, it was the far right, if you might call it that.
Mhm.
Christians or, people who called themselves Christians burning her books and calling her a witch and lots of things that, weren't
Wow.
accurate. Although I
Mm.
understand
That
people's
puts
fear.
her in great company
Really?
historically, doesn't it?
She's one of the most banned authors of all time. And, I should
Wow.
say, Leighton, for any guests for any viewers who are Christians, I came at Harry Potter initially from that very skeptical background. I was raised in a
Really?
religious home, and there were
Mm.
concerns about Harry Potter and whether it was promoting witchcraft. And so for a while, I stayed away from Harry
Yeah.
Potter. And
Yeah.
then I put together this tour itinerary through England themed around my two of my other favorite authors, Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, and C.S.
Oh,
Lewis, and the
yes.
Chronicles of Narnia. And I
Yeah.
had a dear older friend of mine who's wrote a review for, my book. He's on the back here,
Right.
Bill
Mm.
Potter.
Okay.
He's an amazing Christian guy. He's a historian par excellence, and he was looking at my itinerary and said, "Well, if you're taking people to the UK to do a literature tour, then you should add on J.K. and Harry Potter sites, and that will get you up to the Scottish Highlands and Edinburgh Castle and all those wonderful sites." And I went, "Oh my gosh, Harry Potter again, here we go." I said, "Okay,
Mhm.
I'll read the books." And I was flabbergasted. I mean, here was a series every bit as exciting and entertaining, in my opinion, as Lord of the Rings or Narnia, and
Mhm.
I would add, written by someone coming from a fundamentally Christian worldview. And
Yes.
initially, I was very skeptical of that because
Mhm.
JK is a secular person who today freely admits to being agnostic about a lot of religious matters. But the facts that I came to find out as I researched her life for this book, number one, she attended church all through her teens by herself. From
Mm.
the age of
Mhm.
about 11 to 17, she got baptized on her own and attended church. Even though she came from a
Interesting.
family that was non-religious, she took
Right.
herself to church for years. And I talked to the family of her late pastor. She attended church through part of her 20s, 30s, and 40s in Edinburgh and still is a member of a congregation there. I found out what church that was and found out what level of involvement she had in the congregation. And she has spoken publicly about how much she admires Jesus for his self-sacrifice and that touched
Mm.
very profound level, even to the point of keeping a
Mm.
picture of him in her home. And when you go to
Yes.
Harry Potter, people think, as I did initially, that it's about, this
Yeah.
kid
There's
who,
some messianic themes in there, aren't there?
well, we think it's about, a boy who turns people into frogs or whatever folks may
Right.
think initially, like I did. It is a story of self-sacrifice through and through. It starts with a
Mhm.
mother who sacrifices herself to save her son, and it is
Right.
about that boy, that prophesied about
Yes.
boy
Yeah.
And she said, I chose those messianic traits on purpose. That prophesied boy who then has to face a journey to meet his own death in self-sacrifice to save the
Mhm.
lives of his friends. And then I won't give away any more spoilers for people who haven't
No.
read it, but it is a
Read the
fundamentally
books, folks,
Christian
they're great, yeah.
fundamentally Christian, and I would add, J.K. herself has told us that was quite deliberate because of how much she feels a powerful connection to the idea of self-sacrificial love in the story of Jesus,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
that tied into her personal life because she saw her own mother in that, not in a Christ-like way, but, she revered her mother and lost her mother at a vulnerable age, and that loss of her mother fueled the fact that Harry Potter is a journey to confront death, to overcome the fear of death, to find peace in the face of it. That's a bit of a rambling answer,
Mhm.
but yeah, she started off being canceled by Christians, which was ironic because she was promoting, in some ways, a very Christian storyline.
Yes, yes. I agree with you about the one of the things that I've found in reading her books and, you this I have a literature background. My first degree was in English literature, and so in reading her books, I sort of come to her with that foundation. So I've read Tolkien and people like C.S. Lewis and, of course, the Bible. And I find that one of her talents is she's able to draw from these different streams in terms
Mm.
of the imagery. So there's biblical imagery in there. There's some stuff that you can see Tolkien's fingerprints.
Yep,
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is in
yep,
there. But also, she comes up with some really original
mm,
characters and
yep,
ideas. For example, I remember the first time I was reading about this game, the Quidditch. And I thought, wow, this is so original. What an imagination to come up with this completely unique
yeah,
game. And to picture that, I don't think the movie version really did it justice.
mm.
But would you agree with me about sort of some of those aspects of her writing style?
She's been called by a one of her co-filmmakers on the Harry Potter film series said that she is a volcano of ideas, a
Right.
fountain of creativity and imagination. The point he was
Mm,
trying to get across is that for some reason, and haters of her don't like this, but everything that comes out of that brain is brilliant and original and interesting and sometimes scary. And not everything she says on Twitter, I don't mean that, but in terms of
right.
stories
Yeah.
and characters and plot lines, she has what you can't teach, which is
Yeah.
an innate ability to think herself into the mind of a 50-year-old guy or a 150-year-old lady or a
Yes.
12-year-old girl
Yeah.
and write them convincingly. And most critically, in my mind, one reviewer said, and this is to me the perfect description, J.K. knows down in her bones how to make you keep turning the pages. That's
Yes.
absolutely right.
Yes.
At the end of
Yeah.
the
There's
day
no question.
at the end of the day, they've been trying to figure this out for years. I remember seeing a documentary about Tolkien, and an expert on Tolkien was asked, "Why do people love Lord of the Rings? Why do people love Harry Potter?" It's like, on one level, you could give a very profound, deep, long answer, but the simple answer is, as this Tolkien scholar said, it's a darn good story. It's just
Yeah.
interesting. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
exciting and
Yeah.
fun, and you want to keep turning.
And great characters. She develops
Yes.
great characters.
Right, that have
Yeah.
really resonated with an amazing number of people of all different generations, right? This isn't just kids, these are grandparents reading to the kids and parents finding comfort or interest in the books
Mhm.
of all different cultures. 200 territories, 100 languages. In terms of the speed at which this series captured the imagination of the entire world, there's nothing to compare it to. Nothing,
No.
ever.
No, really, not in recent memory. But that's for sure, and, one of the things that I really find interesting about, her writing as well is that, she creates very, very interesting characters. I find one of the ways to distinguish good fiction from bad fiction is bad fiction focuses on plot lines.
Mm,
And you'll lose a reader very quickly, but, the great writers develop these really interesting characters, and so you
yes.
identify with them,
Right,
and then you're willing to go along with them on
right,
their adventures,
right.
and this is, I think, one of her great talents is she creates all these interesting characters, great villains, interesting
That's
heroes, foils, foibles, and the friendships that are there, in terms of Harry Potter's group with Hermione and the others.
right.
So that's a real hallmark of great writing too, isn't it?
James Patterson would agree with you if anyone knows, James
Oh yeah.
Patterson is now it's interesting, he's described as the number 1 best-selling author. I don't know how they rank that because proportionally J.K. is but whatever, he's definitely up there,
Yeah.
but James Patterson
Only
talks
only the Bible outsells these guys.
that's right. There were all sorts of jokes made back in the day when J.K. was getting canceled by certain Christian communities about how, that she was outselling God and things like that. But anyway, James Patterson said
Yeah. Yeah.
he'll read a novel where it'll be someone running for their life, escaping into a shed or whatever the scene may be. And he says that annoys him because it's like, why do I care about this person who's running into the shed? First,
Yes,
as you said,
exactly.
first it's
Yeah.
why do I care about this character? So I think
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll let him speak on that point, and I think
Yeah, he knows a thing or two. He's written
yeah,
some great ones.
that's
But
right.
hey, speaking of somebody who's written a lot, let's talk about you. You're our guest here. How remarkable is it for a young man, 22 years of age, has already written 10 books? Your first one, I understand you wrote at the tender age of 12, barely the age of reason, as we used to call it, and now 10 books. And I'm curious to know what sort of sparked your passion, that initial passion for history, and how did your family and your background, your educational background, I understand you were homeschooled.
Yes.
How did that sort of all blend and draw you towards being such a prolific young author?
I'm grateful for all the questions and for this one. I must confess I bet I have a bit of the politician streak in me. I could go off for the next hour giving you my biography, but the essentials to not bore you are this. I had first off, and no, they're not listening right now, although I'm sure they will listen later, and no, they're not paying me to say this, but my mom, from the time I was literally inside her, was reading to me
Mm.
right near me on the, beside my desk, which people listening to this couldn't see, but, beside my desk, um, is a series of the Chronicles of Narnia that she bought me when I was very young,
Oh, okay.
among many
Yeah.
other books. So that's ingredient number 1 in my mind, which is my mom was a reading teacher, public school teacher, always
Mm.
giving me books, encouraging my passions there, and I started reading from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, books about the
Yeah.
Statue of Liberty, or the Titanic, or the Wild West, or World War II and Winston Churchill.
Right.
And I have a dad who's a self-made businessman. He's a real go-getter. He was raised in a
Mm.
poor home, fairly poor home, and lived what they call the American dream through, when he was 19, buying a duplex in downtown Buffalo, where I'm from, renovating it by himself, renting that out, waiting a number of years, saving up enough to buy another small, place, and then eventually an apartment complex later, and so on and so forth. And he's a real go-getter, and he was always encouraging my passions, but giving me really helpful advice at the same time. So when I was 11
Mhm.
years old, I was trying to figure out what to pour my time and energy into. I was really interested in politics. And I was thinking initially of designing a board game, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And my dad said to me one day at his workbench downstairs, right below me where I am in the house today, he said, "What do you love more than anything else, Solomon?" I said, "US history." And he said, "Why don't you write a book for kids your age about American history?" I said, "Okay."
Hence History Bites series.
History Bites. And my idea with that was to write a series for kids, but for anybody that would
Mhm.
make history not this scary
Right.
topic sitting on a dusty, big textbook on a shelf
Yeah.
somewhere, but through using, hopefully engaging storytelling with facts, of course,
Yeah.
pictures, fun facts, review questions, vocabulary, very colorful design to make it engaging for kids. And I did 8 books in that History Bites series that cover hundreds of people and events from
Wow.
different time periods and,
Mhm.
places, from world history, and I'm very grateful, Leighton, because I've had kids now, actually quite a few kids, use the books, and not just use them, but read them with a flashlight under their cover at night, where their parents have to come in and take them away because it's time to go to bed, and
Mhm.
wake up with them beside their bed and hold them around, like walk around holding them, and I'm so beyond thrilled about that because it shows what I always thought, which is that history was not the problem, it's the way it's presented, and
Yes.
these stories of
Yes.
George Washington and Winston
Mhm.
Churchill and great adventures, as corny as this may sound, they're just as interesting as anything that ever happened in fiction. In
Yeah.
fact, a lot of the stories I wrote for my book, Great Adventures History Bites, you would think they were made up. If they happened today, you would probably think it was a phony story. Thor
Mhm.
Heyerdahl, a Norwegian explorer, drifts 5,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean on a wooden raft with no motor and no modern navigation equipment to prove a scientific theory. Ernest
Yeah.
Shackleton goes to Antarctica and gets stuck in
Mhm.
hostile environments known to mankind for 16 months, saves all 27 of his men through starvation, through blizzards, through orca whale
Mhm.
attacks, through leopard seal attacks, all these things. You'd go, man, this is like sitting down and writing up a movie script. And that's also what inspired me to do a YouTube channel. I have a History Bites YouTube channel where I make content that ties into
Oh, wonderful.
books and do interviews. So I would say all those ingredients played into me starting writing. And in terms of homeschooling, that gave me the ability when it came to my schedule to say, get up as early as I wanted. I could start school at 5:30, 6 o'clock if I was up, do my classes till say 12, 1 o'clock. And then in the afternoon, I wasn't big into sports. So I would write for years, write, research, read, write, research, read, and edit and do graphic designing and all that stuff. And of course, without trying to sound cliched, I have a lot of really great friends, mentor figures. I mentioned that historian Harry
Mhm.
Potter, role models who,
Yeah.
from the time I was 11 or 12 years old, looked at my first book, didn't despise me because I was young, didn't look down on me, supported my work, reviewed my work, shared about my work. And that's not to say it takes a village, but in some ways, I
Right.
guess it
We
does.
we don't achieve anything by ourselves, do we?
Well, think about it.
Yeah.
I think about this all the time, Leighton. I know whatever people may think about him, Robert Kennedy, Secretary Kennedy,
Mhm.
he's someone, a little name dropping here. I interviewed him for my
Yeah.
biography on Alan Dershowitz, the great attorney. And
Yes.
one of the things he said, which sticks with me, is he's a student of history. And he said he thinks all the time about the fact that how dependent we are on the work of other people, the people who built
Mhm.
the roads we drive on,
Yeah. Standing on the shoulders of giants.
window
Exactly.
panes were designed by someone, and think about how many blessings there are to live in a century where there's electric lights and there's
Yes.
eyeglasses that work really well and
Yeah.
technology where you and I can talk from many, many
Yes.
miles away instantaneously.
Indeed.
Like, all these things, like, at any one second, from a material standpoint, I'm totally dependent on the work and sweat and tears and kindness of many other people. And, from a spiritual perspective, if people believe in this, you know, the Bible talks about the entire universe being held in God's hands, right?
Right.
So, like, every part of it in some way is it's not controlled by you, and also, like, that means it's not all about you, right? And I need that
Mhm.
reminder all the time, right? Is like,
Mhm.
the universe is not it's not it's about others and serving.
Mhm.
And that sounds
Yeah.
super pious, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but I
No,
know in my
no.
heart it's true.
But that's I'm glad you said that because I want to ask you, Solomon, that obviously you're a person of tremendous inspiration,
Mm,
and you have been from an early age.
mm.
What role does your faith play in that? Because obviously your work in the History Bites series and making history accessible and fun and interesting to young kids, um, and your passion for that is really resonating with them. And so it seems clear that God is speaking through you and your work.
Well,
I'm curious to know what sort of role does your faith play in your writing and inspiring you to create new works of fiction and nonfiction?
I haven't given that a great deal of thought, Lane, but the answers that come to me just quickly are a few. The Christian faith is an amazing faith for people who love history because it's rooted in thousands of years of civilizational history.
Right.
When you think about the entire historical narrative of the Bible, from Abraham receiving the promise that his seed would bless the entire world, to the Apostle Paul later applying that to the spiritual children of Jesus. When you
Hmm.
think about that thousands of years of narrative, which continues to this day, and crazy things, which this is where people really start to get freaked out one way or the other. I have atheist friends who are very skeptical of this, which I understand, but then I have
Right.
Christian friends of this who are like, this is the proof. When you see
Mhm.
that, prophecies were made by Isaiah hundreds of years before Jesus's birth that in very explicit detail describe his ministry in ways that could not have been made up because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all independently attested documents
Mhm.
that are very clearly eyewitness documents and did not come from one central source where they could be controlled.
Right.
When you start to realize that, and two, that Jesus made prophecies about his life and work that are still true 2,000 years later, he said, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed and it
Yeah.
grows, or I think not a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a seed that is planted and then it grows into a
Right.
tree in which all the birds of the air nest. What does that mean? It means the entire world will know the teachings of Jesus. And that's exactly what happened. And you can
Mhm.
say, well, he was a lucky guesser, maybe. Or the other answer is like, oh my gosh, well, if I choose that answer, then everything has to change. So, from a history
Mhm.
perspective, being a Christian, learning about the Christian faith, reading the Bible is to see yourself as part, a very, very infinitesimal part of a giant, grand story being worked out
Mhm.
over thousands of years.
Wow,
That's
what a
not
great
only
image that is.
that's
That's a
not
great
only
metaphor.
that's not
You must be
only
an author.
you know what? I take that's from Tolkien. Tolkien
Yeah.
talked about that. Tolkien talked
Mhm.
about how Christianity teaches you that it's a great story written by one author.
Right.
When you
Yeah.
and there are days where your faith wanes and waxes or grows dim and you wonder if that's really true, but on the days where, you're given the grace to believe it by God, it's amazingly thrilling and humbling. So that's
Mhm.
one point. The other thing I would say is in terms of inspiring me, growing up reading, in particular, C.S. Lewis,
Right.
there was, mm, I'm sure there are many inspiring Christian writers, but C.S. Lewis was about the most inspiring Christian writer you can think of. He was someone who,
Mhm.
when the Apostle Paul says, set your mind on heavenly things, on your heavenly destination. That's what he did. And this
Mhm.
whole
Mhm.
idea that the human race is bound for another, better, more wonderful, full, more noble existence, that rings true to the deepest parts of our soul. There's a
Mhm.
reason that the story of Jesus touches more people than any story. Not, I don't mean story like fantasy. I mean like a profoundly deep story,
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
There's a reason it
Yeah.
touches people on that level. It's not accident. It's because it answers these, in my opinion, it answers these great longing questions of the human heart. And one of
Mhm.
them
Mhm.
is this world all there is? And I would add, J.K. Rowling deals with that all the time. When
Yeah.
she and her co-creators on the Broadway play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, which is like a sequel to Harry Potter, they were having a conversation. These are all people who aren't necessarily of faith. What they all agreed was that, in their opinion, the attraction of Harry Potter was the idea of another world beyond our own, a better
Right.
world.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
exactly the same theme in Tolkien and
Yeah.
Lewis. And
Mm.
Tolkien said and Lewis said, that's because we are made for another world.
Right.
That
So we
idea
yearn for it.
that
Yeah.
idea is distinctly, like,
Yeah.
not exclusively Christian, of course, but a
Mhm.
very distinctly Christian idea. Jesus, all through the Gospels, is hammering home the point that you are on to another destination. You should not only
Right.
understand that, but live your life and make your decisions based on that assumption. So I think as a Christian, when you begin to not only hear that from C.S. Lewis, who presents it in very inspiring terms, but you begin to then read the Bible and understand that that's exactly what's being said there too.
Yeah.
That what's more inspiring than that, than to think that
Mhm.
by God's grace, we can be headed to paradise. And
Mhm.
that sounds like a fool's fantasy. Well, and that's exactly why Christians in the New Testament were called fools for Christ. When when he was giving an account of his faith to King Agrippa in the book of Acts, when he was hauled before his persecutor,
Right.
and he gave the
Mhm.
whole spiel about
Yeah.
the prophecies leading to
Yeah.
Christ and the rest.
You almost make me become a Christian,
Well,
he
yeah,
says.
well,
Yeah.
and one of them said, "You're mad, Paul. You're
Yeah.
nuts. You're nuts, Paul." So I guess I haven't given that a great deal of thought, but those are the answers that come to me right
Yeah.
off the bat, and
Well,
this is not
that
to
tells
sit
us a lot
here.
about your
Yeah,
writing, doesn't it? And I know you weave
yeah,
a lot of these, different stories and historical stories, people like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien into the stories that you tell in
yeah.
history bites. Um, I want to talk to you about though that you mentioned uh, earlier this other book that you wrote, which seems like a little bit off script for you. This biography that you wrote, "Legal Gladiator: The Life of Alan Dershowitz." And again, I'm a lawyer. Alan Dershowitz is a very esteemed attorney, one of the most famous in the world. And you gave and he actually gave you unprecedented access to his archives and his personal interviews. And what first of all, I'm interested to know what drew you to that subject. Firstly, and what surprised you most about Dershowitz's life and career, and sort of what lessons did you take away from doing that book?
It is a bit of a departure from the standpoint of when I was 18 and I had done some books in my History Bites series, I was looking for a different kind of project. I had initially had an interest in doing a full-length biography of Peter Jackson, the movie director behind The Lord of the
Oh
Rings.
yes,
So
right.
in my mind, I had always thought, a biography would be an interesting project. Then
Right.
I wanted to interview Professor Dershowitz on my History Bites YouTube channel, and the more I looked into his life, the more I was unendingly intrigued. The
Hmm.
list of cases he's involved in: O.J. Simpson, Klaus von Bülow, which was made into an Academy Award-winning film with Glenn Close, um, Mike Tyson, Jeffrey Epstein, President Trump, President Clinton, and not just the legal cases, but the legal career, the teaching career at Harvard, 50 years, Ted Cruz, Jamie Raskin, Elena Kagan, Mike Pompeo. They were all his students. He knew Barack Obama when he was a young guy. All these aspects of his career and his Israel career, which is very controversial, obviously, but he's known Bibi
Hmm.
Netanyahu for 53 years and lots of other interesting figures. He
Right.
knew Golda Meir, for crying out loud. All these
Hmm.
things just made me go, holy smokes, this guy's got an unbelievably interesting life story. And then to find out there was no biography about him, it was like, okay, I have to pursue this. And through a series of events, I was able to meet him. As I started to do research on his life and send out interview requests, I connected with a friend of his who was able to introduce me. And then I told Professor Dershowitz what I wanted to do with his biography, that I wanted to write it. Here was my plan for it. And he said, I'd be honored if you would do it. And I'll give you access
Oh,
to the files at
wonderful.
Brooklyn College. And so we embarked on a journey of a number of years on that, which I enjoyed immensely. And I'm happy that it turned into a book that people can read, because that's obviously the end
Hmm.
goal is to collect this information from firsthand sources. I got access to pretty much all those people I mentioned earlier, obviously not Jeffrey Epstein or Klaus von Bülow, but O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, President Trump, Jim Baker, you name it.
Hmm.
And so getting to not only talk to those people, but get their quotes, stories, anecdotes, testimonies, and share them with people in the narrative of Professor Dershowitz's life. It What I learned was something I had not understood beforehand, which is Dershowitz does not represent guilty people because he wants to get murderers off.
Right.
He represents guilty people to defend the constitutional rule of law. And he sees
Hmm.
himself in a line going directly back to John Adams defending the British
Hmm.
soldiers who killed people in the Boston Massacre. And John
Right.
Adams was told, how could you? These people
Yeah.
killed your fellow citizens who you're on the side of. He
Hmm.
was censored, people disassociated from him, and he said, "What kind of society are we if we don't defend those we hate?" That's the whole
Right.
idea of the system, and that goes back to biblical times, right?
Sure. Oh,
Testimony of
absolutely.
2 or 3 witnesses in both the Old and
Hmm.
New Testaments is
Yeah.
required to to, uh, uh, to convict someone of a crime. In the Old
Hmm.
Testament times, if testimony between witnesses disagreed on the smallest details, the entire case was
Sure.
thrown out.
Well,
That's
even the rule of law, Solomon, is an Old Testament principle, isn't it?
right. So that's not I'm not trying to make a stump speech for Alan Dershowitz. My point
No,
is
no, we're
I
talking
had
about the book you wrote.
yeah, I had never realized that, and then as part of my research for the book, I also talked to dissidents from Eastern Europe and the Soviet
Oh, yeah.
Union. I talked to people who had been in Soviet labor camps for 4 years, 12 years,
Mm,
and solitary
wow,
confinement for 4 years, people who lived under Ceausescu in Romania, the dictator,
wow.
and what I got from those people was an understanding of what it's like to live in a country without people like Alan Dershowitz being allowed to practice law. And whatever
Mhm,
people may think
mhm.
of Alan Dershowitz or any of his type of lawyers, one of the main differences that separates us from the Soviet Union and these other countries is defense attorneys, and people
Yes.
hate them. And
Yeah.
I understand why they do, and Dershowitz
Mm,
understands why they do, but the fact is that is a differentiating factor. In the Soviet Union, you were given a defense attorney, um, who got a permit from the government before he could do your case, which means you were screwed no matter what because the
yeah.
government was
That
controlling.
was the kind of lawyer Solzhenitsyn got.
Right. So that and in terms of, like, what makes a free society, free speech, free economy, and a robust legal system.
Right.
If you don't
Yeah,
have one of those 3, you don't have a free society,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah. One thing that you must say and recognize about Alan Dershowitz is that he's somebody who is very, very interested in the truth. He's,
Yes.
he's always trying to get at the truth of matters, and he's fearless. He's fearless in
Yes.
pursuit of that truth, and
Yes.
I think that's quite admirable. So I could see why you found him such an intriguing character to write a book about. I want to talk more about your most recent book, which is called "A Pen to Change the World: Life of J.K. Rowling." And, she says these really interesting things. Here's another one. You've probably read this one, Solomon. She says, if you believe free speech is for you, but not your political opponents, you're illiberal.
Mm,
If no contrary evidence could change your beliefs, you're a fundamentalist. If you believe the state should punish those with contrary views, you're a totalitarian.
mhm,
If you believe political opponents should be punished with violence or death, you're a terrorist.
mhm.
This is really interesting stuff from
Yes.
somebody who's supposed to be kind of a children's author.
Right.
And your most recent book is the first complete biography of her. And I'm interested to know, you talked a little bit about her writing and things like that, but what kind of drew you to her story? And how did you approach writing about basically a living literary icon who has been both celebrated and, as I just noted, is so controversial?
Well, it's interesting, Leighton, because I didn't initially plan this, but it turns out there was a huge connection between the Dershowitz book and the J.K. book
Really?
because both of them are people who come from the left who have been "canceled," quote,
Ah,
unquote, by the
right.
left,
Yeah,
including literally in the same 6-month time span.
yeah.
Dershowitz, the situation was in January of 2020. He went on the floor of the
Mm,
Senate during President Trump's first impeachment trial, represented him, and that
yeah,
was it. He's never looked back. He's lost a lot of his friends, a lot of his reputation among the left. J.K. Rowling was 6 months later. 6
yeah,
months later, her slew of famous, infamous tweets came out, and she never looked
yeah,
back, and unfortunately, among some quarters, never will. Will never be looked at
yeah.
the same way again. I say unfortunately only because, we know that any disunity, any any anger and all that ultimately is a sad thing.
Yes.
But, there might be reasons why people feel justified in getting angry, and I go into in the book, in both the Dershowitz book and this book, I did not come to these subjects going, "Let me tell people how J.K. and Dershowitz were the greatest people who ever lived." It wasn't like that.
Right.
I'm
Right.
interested in their careers
Mhm.
and interested in providing people a narrative of their lives. That was it. With the transgender controversy, I interviewed people on the front lines of both sides of this in the UK. I had a transgender friend of mine and even one of my editors who read the book who has a transgender sibling say, "Solomon, I really appreciate the fact that you weren't trying to push a narrative in this book. You were genuinely curious." And some of the
Right.
initial reviews have said it's nice that the author is objective and being unbiased and letting us come to our own conclusions. So I give you what JK and her side said, is offended about what they've experienced and what the other side says in response, and you People can make up their own minds. They're smart. They can do that. They don't
Yeah.
need my help. So the content is there for you to digest. I did the work of going through it and hopefully putting it into a narrative that's easy to follow and interesting and interesting in a disturbing way. I mean, some of this content we're talking about assault and murder and death threats and predators coming to the house where JK's kids live and the Potter actors and actresses who grew up idolizing her, disassociating from her. I mean, we're talking about sad things,
Yes.
but interesting in that kind of disturbing way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the Dershowitz book, in a way, prepared me for this book because I knew what to expect with what they call cancel culture.
Yes.
There are
Yeah.
people who regularly call Dershowitz a pedophile and wish him dead and have tried to kill him. There are people
Yeah.
who regularly
They're trying to link him to Epstein even.
Yes, well, that's
Yeah.
exactly it. And there are
Mm.
people who regularly call JK, you know, a I've just heard this in the last couple days on my
A
own page.
turf, whatever that
TERF,
is.
a genocidal transphobe,
Yeah.
and I knew I was gonna get hate from that, and I'm getting it actually right now, Leighton. I'm getting spammed with one-star reviews on Goodreads. Harry Potter sites won't mention the book because they won't even cover her. I've had
Uh,
organizations that represent thousands of bookstores, if you can believe this, organizations that are in charge of representing thousands of independent bookstores throughout the United States. They have refused even paid advertising dollars about this book. They say the subject matter is not fit for our clientele. That is,
mm,
all of the bookstores throughout major swaths of the United States have no reason to hear about the newest biography of the most famous author in the world. So
right.
I mean, I'm getting a lot of that right now. Some of it
Wow.
nasty stuff, even to people who are
Mhm.
helping me call bookstores and make people wear the book they've been hung up on, gotten verbally aggressive towards. So that helped all these experiences, especially on the Dershowitz book, helped prepare me for that with this JK book. And I was then it was also helpful to understand the personal reasons why JK spoke out in this controversy. I mean, the more I learned about her life and what she has publicly said, her past absolutely informed her decision to speak out in this. She speaks as
Mhm.
someone who had suffered domestic abuse from her first husband. I met
Right.
that man, tracked him down, found him in Portugal, spoke with him. She experienced a violent first marriage. She experienced sexual assault. That's one key pillar. The other pillar is, sadly, she had a very, very tortured relationship with her father growing up. JK was
Mm.
born into the wrong gender. Her father wanted a
Mhm.
son desperately, picked out the boy's name, and then it turns out to be Joanne. And
Uh,
if it had stopped there, maybe it would have been okay, except she knew for some odd reason, he told her all throughout her childhood what a disappointment she was. So that screwed her up for the rest of her
yeah,
life,
it would.
psychologically,
Mhm.
to the point, Leighton, where 50 years later, 55 years after her birth, when her father wanted a son, and later on told her that. When she spoke out on the transgender controversy, she said, "The reason I feel so passionate about this issue is because if I had had the option, the ability to do transgender surgery back in the 70s or 80s, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son my father openly
Mm.
said he'd have preferred." That's a direct quote. And then
Wow.
she said, of course, that I would also have missed motherhood, which is the best part of my life. That's what she
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those things were hugely important. And then to see, Leighton, that the seeds of this were laid in the earliest parts of her life made the narrative of the book much easier from my perspective because you didn't have to make people realize, oh my gosh, in 2020, JK just came out and blew up her legacy because she has a big mouth on X.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
you were able to see that the seeds of this were laid decades before and then see how those played out through her violent first marriage, which I give the full account of in this book,
Mhm.
through the tortured relationship with her father. I interviewed relatives of her who spoke to me about that. It's sad. JK's been public talking about that with her father, so it's unfortunate, but was already out there. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of how I approached that
Mhm.
aspect of her life. I'm not sure how much
Mhm.
that answers your question.
No, this is great because we're getting some of the detail that people can find out more about by reading your book.
Yeah.
She just talking about this whole transgender issue that this fray that she walked into. As I read her comments, Solomon, I'm interested to get your take on this. I don't see J.K. Rowling attacking transgenderism per se. What I see her doing is defending womanhood.
Mm.
She sees transgenderism as an attack on womanhood.
Mm.
And there's a lot of evidence for that. I mean, one of the most insulting things you could say to a woman, I have no idea what it's like to be a woman.
Mm.
I imagine it's pretty hard
Mm.
because I'm married, I have a wife, and I see what she goes through day after day being a
Yeah.
wife and a mother.
Yeah.
But I think one of the most insulting things that a man could say to a woman is that I could just decide to be a woman.
Mm.
And what I see J.K. Rowling saying is, no, wait a minute. Being a woman is a very distinct thing,
Right.
and it's important culturally. It's important biologically to recognize the authenticity of womanhood
Mhm.
and not to denigrate that by saying, "Oh, it's just like a fashion choice." Do I have that right, or what's your take on that?
You're yeah, totally right. JK was always a feminist from the time she was a young girl. I mean, and that was partly out of rebellion to her father, who, she desperately wanted to give the metaphorical middle finger to, if you
Yeah,
understand, but
yeah,
that's totally
sure. She
accurate.
wanted to
That's
prove him wrong, right?
yeah,
Look at what I can do. Yeah,
she definitely had that streak in her, as so many of us do, right? I mean, I'm
yeah,
not saying I do, but, like, I get that that's not anything overly unusual there. A teenager wants to
yeah.
rebel, but, I mean,
Mhm.
that's been in her from the time she was young in terms of standing up for her womanhood as she sees it, and
Yeah.
she even said she got to a point shamingly late in life were her words, where she no longer wanted to please her father and began to embrace her
Ah,
womanhood and femininity. So
right.
that is a huge factor in it. The other
Mhm.
aspect though, Leighton, and this is not to disagree with you at all though, one of the
Yeah.
things that has made the transgender community very upset with her is, from what I can tell, is the fact that she does go on the offensive against transgenderism. She has come
Right.
out and said,
Yeah.
"You are
Right.
not the gender you think you are. I'm sorry."
Right.
And
Mhm.
actually,
Mhm.
I'm not sorry. Uh,
Yeah.
Using, in some people's eyes, very demeaning, sarcastic, uh, um, tweets and language sounds
She'd be someone who'd
full of
be very difficult to win a war of words with her, wouldn't it, Solomon?
complete so that whatever people think about that, she must believe that this is for a good purpose. O Obviously, she says she does. She has very much gone on the offensive and hit at the fundamental arguments underpinning transgender ideology, and
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
why, not to turn it to me, but that's why probably right now as we sit here, my phone is pinging with comments to my Facebook page about how she's a bigot, you're a bigot for writing about her,
Mm.
all these things.
Mm.
She has gone very much
Yeah.
out of her way to say,
Yeah.
"You're not who you think you are. You are what
Right.
your chromosomes tell you you are, and get
Right.
over it or else." And, oh, and
Yes.
by the
Yes.
way, I'm gonna do whatever I can
Yeah.
to legally oppose you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
yep, she's
Yeah.
come out
No, I
blazing.
see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Where I was distinguishing Solomon is from someone, say, like Matt Walsh,
Mm,
who is very on the nose.
mm,
But what I see is, yes, you're right. She has gone on the offensive, but the place where she's coming from, as I interpret her comments on transgenderism, is in defense of womanhood and
yes.
its authenticity. And
Yes.
you're right. She's not afraid to say things that will offend somebody
Yes.
in the pursuit of that cause. But I
Yes.
don't see her as being malicious towards
Mm.
transgender people or we're trying to hurt somebody else. She's just defending, I think, what she considers to be a very important truth about humanity.
She initially One of the things I discovered was that she initially supported transgender rights. She came to the
Yeah.
United States in 2016, about a month after wining and dining with President Obama. She accepted a prestigious award from a left-wing literary society, and in that
Mhm.
speech, there were two very important things she said. One was she talked about the great struggles for minority rights, and one of the
Mhm.
minority rights struggles she mentioned was the fight for transgender rights. So the
Oh,
interesting
really?
question to me was, well, what happened between 2016 and
Mhm.
in 2020? So that answer is given in the book. The second important thing she said is even though this was a time when she was viciously going after President Trump on then Twitter,
Right.
I mean,
Mhm.
like,
I
mocking
remember. I saw
him,
some of the tweets.
ripping him to
Oh, yeah.
pieces left, right, and center
Sure.
in the most,
Sure.
cruel,
Yeah.
demeaning way possible. I'm not
Yeah.
saying he didn't I'm not sticking up for him, I'm just reporting what she did.
Sure.
Even then, during that time, she called out the left-wing people in that audience for wanting to ban and censor Trump. She said, "His right to say whatever he wants gives me my right to call him an idiot." So those are two
Yeah.
very interesting things from the perspective of her political advocacy and why she spoke out on the transgender issue is,
Sure.
4 years
Yeah.
later, she is speaking out against this movement, number 1, and then number 2, also repeating what she had said 4 years earlier, which is that this movement is trying to infringe on our free speech. Very much in
Yes.
the Jordan Peterson vein of,
Mhm. Yes.
that was the straw that
Yeah,
broke
don't compel my
the crack.
speech. Yeah. Yeah.
That was it. Jordan Peterson said, and
Yeah.
people may not believe him, but he said, "I'll use the pronouns in private, I'll respect transgender people, but if you go putting this into law, we're done." And
Yes.
that's what he said.
That's
I'm not
the
saying it's
that's the
true,
line
but
in the sand. Yeah.
right, that was
Yeah.
very similar to JK, and
Yeah.
she had latent instances where she deliberately tried to break hate crime laws that were passed by the Scottish government, and she was reported to the
Mhm.
police. That whole saga is put into the book about how she
Really?
almost went to jail, why she didn't.
Oh,
Oh,
that would
yeah.
be fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, she's really a fearless person. Another one of her quotes, she says, "It's impossible to live without failing at something
Mm.
unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default." Again, she's an incredible wordsmith.
Yes.
Um, I wanted to talk to you though, before you go. I mean, you've got this tag now of being the youngest child historian in America, which is kind of a badge of courage for you. You've sort of found your niche. But as a young historian, you've conducted interviews, you led tours, you built this YouTube channel alongside your writing. I'm curious to know, as somebody who's a young person who's kind of on the cutting edge of this technology and using it, how has digital media changed
Mm.
the way that you think history can be taught and consumed, especially by kids? And do you see yourself as part of that shift?
I would hope to be a small part of that shift. I mean, I would say thing that immediately comes to mind is I've spent some time overseas. Been blessed to film on all 7 continents for my History Bites YouTube channel. One of the countries I have visited is Nepal, which is a tiny
Mm,
landlocked country
right.
snuggled between India and China,
Mhm.
with Mount Everest in the Himalayas as its claim to fame.
Mhm.
And it's a very poor country. And not to toot my own horn, but I've done some work there in terms of trying to grow education. And I have some
Mhm.
great folks who I partner with in Nepal for a workbook that was created to be used by students in remote villages who don't have access to physical school buildings. It's called the Japa Workbook Initiative, and it's named after 2 people I am lucky to know and have known. One was Jane Goodall, the famous
Oh,
scientist
really?
who studied
Wow.
chimpanzees, who did
Mhm.
work in Nepal, and I was in Nepal with her for some of that work. And the other person is Appa Sherpa, who held the world record for summiting Mount Everest 21 times. And that workbook I do in partnership with their foundations in Nepal. And all this to say, digital media, book world, the vision I have for it, and even with Starlink and new
Mhm.
technologies like that, the
Yeah.
vision I have, which is so exciting, is that areas of the world where people really need help now can get a lot of help. And
Mhm.
that comes with dangers too, because sadly, and this isn't to patronize anyone in Nepal or anywhere, but one of the things you'll notice uh, in preparing for one of my YouTube videos that I filmed on the way to Mount Everest, I filmed about Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, the first guys up to the top of Mount Everest. Edmund Hillary
Right.
being a New
Mhm.
Zealander and Tenzing Norgay
Mhm.
being a Sherpa guy. I read
Mhm.
Tenzing Norgay's autobiography that he had a writer help him with. And in that autobiography, Tenzing Norgay talks about growing up in a little village in the Himalayas, cut off from the rest of the world in every way, not even knowing there was a world outside the mountains. This was
Mhm.
the early 1900s. And he slept
Right.
in a hut, you know, glorified house with yak yak, animals on the ground
Mhm.
floor, and his family all in a tiny loft. He, his parents, and his siblings in a place that stunk
So,
really
not
bad.
exactly Mar-a-Lago.
Right, well, and you know what he said, and this line I still remember years later, is that, "We were happy because we didn't know there was any other way to live," he
Right.
said.
Yeah.
And now, sadly, but not sadly, with the advent of phones, and no, I haven't
Yeah.
been looking at my phone throughout the interview, but Um, with the advent of phones, the sad thing is, Leighton, they can be used for a great purpose. The digital ability can be used to help expand education in these rural areas, but it also comes with a cost because these folks then see what Mar-a-Lago looks like and they go, "Oh, if I only get to America, I'll get that too."
Right.
And so many of these folks cannot come.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's not me trying to say increase immigration or anything like that, but, so I see that as a knife that cuts both ways, but hopefully, in a very long answer, I would say what comes to mind for me with books, the literary world, education, and where digital media is concerned is the use that it can be made to bring education to the entire world for the
Yeah.
first time in world
And
history.
truth, right? And truth, which
Yes.
is, sadly is in short supply these days.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, last thing I wanna ask you about is, what's next for you? I mean, you've got so many things on the go. Are you working on another book right now or any particular project you wanna tell us about that's, near and dear to your heart?
I I'm grateful you asked that, and all the questions. The project I've been working on for, a bit of time now, and which will take me a long time, is what my publisher and I are planning to be the definitive biography of President Trump. And what I mean
Oh,
by that is
wow.
pretty much every book written about him comes from a partisan perspective. I'm not
Right.
registered with a political party. I don't even vote. And I get a lot of grief from people about that who believe I'm dishonoring veterans by not voting. I understand that. It's what I want to do to take my job as a historian in the most sacred way
Right.
possible
That's part of your integrity.
without trying to sound
Mhm.
self-important at all.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
desperately need historians who are going to break away from
Amen.
this very self-centered way of writing
Yeah.
and researching, which is to make it about the author and my opinions. I'm sorry, I thought biographies were about the subject, not the author. So in the case of President Trump, that by the way, that was sarcastic, but in the case of President Trump, he has this, for whatever people may think, he has this incredibly historic, interesting life, and
Mhm.
just let that tell itself and get out of the
Yeah.
way and let people read that. There are old school biographies written by David McCullough and Robert Caro, and
Sure.
for a person of this stature and historic significance, for good or bad in people's minds, a book like that is needed for the
Yes.
readership at large, but also for future
Yeah.
generations of college students, high school students, researchers, historians, and it's
Yeah.
not being done. So my publisher, who published First Lady Trump's memoir and other very interesting titles, including by enemies of the president. They published Michael Cohen's book Disloyal from about 10 years ago when his attorney published
Right.
the tell-all book.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
they're the perfect publisher to do it, and, I've been blessed to have access to folks who, know President Trump. I've interviewed him in the past, and it seemed like something that I should do because I could do and wanted to do. So that's gonna be a long-term project, Lane, but I'm
Oh,
very
exciting.
excited about that.
Well, thank God you're not writing a Barack Obama biography because we have too many of those, especially the
Sure,
ones written by Barack Obama
sure,
himself.
sure. Well,
But,
I would say this, if, this might not win me any fans, but I if President Obama didn't have an objective biography and he was willing to cooperate with it, I would do one on him. I mean, it's just
well, and yours would probably would be excellent. In
I
fact, I know it
appreciate
would.
that.
Yeah. So, we've been talking with, author and, media personality Solomon Schmidt, historian. I should add in there, he's got a v almost an incredible resume at such a young age. And, I have to say, Solomon, it's really wonderful to speak with someone, your age, and this is not to I hope you don't take this, in the wrong way, but
No, no.
who has so much wisdom. And I think you're a great example to young people of how much wisdom can be gathered when you spend your youth reading old books.
Mm, mm,
I can tell from talking to you that you have a wisdom that's beyond your years,
mm.
and that and the way that you write is very mature and interesting. And
Thank
so,
you.
God bless you for that, and for writing these two books that we're adding to our reading list.
Uh,
One is called A Pen to Challenge the World, The Life of J.K. Rowling. That's your most recent book. We're also adding to our reading list Legal Gladiator, The Life of Alan Dershowitz. I've not yet had the pleasure of reading that book, but I will. I will be reading it, especially after
Thank you.
talking with you for this hour that you've spent with us. And thank you so much for taking this time with us. God bless you and everything that you're doing. I can't wait to to see how the Trump biography works out. If people
Thank you.
want to follow you and find out more about you, you mentioned the YouTube channel. Where else can they find you? Are you on Substack and other places? So let us know where people can connect with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The best place would be my website, solomonschmidt.com, or the website dedicated for my History Bites series, historybites.com. And folks can also find links there to the tours I run in England and Scotland themed around Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and J.K.,
Mm.
running one next summer in July through
Oh,
London
wonderful.
and Oxford and Edinburgh and lots of different amazing places. And my books are available wherever books are sold. And I would say I appreciate your words very much, Leighton. I'm grateful for you supporting me and having me on. And when it comes to wisdom, my mind goes to what Paul talks about in the New Testament, which is that let he who thinks he knows something take heed lest he fall. There's a great benediction in one of the New Testament books that says that God alone is wise. And I'm not trying to sound overly um, religious when I say that, but wisdom, right? Wisdom comes from God, and
Hmm.
it's you would be you would be foolish to think anything else, and very quickly you would find out that He alone has wisdom. So, thank you. All that to say, thank you.
Wow, that's a wonderful way to leave off the conversation. Again, it's been our great joy to meet you, to learn
You
more
too.
about you and all of your incredible work. I wish you much continued success in all of your endeavors, Solomon,
You as
and
well.
keep writing. I can't, I don't know how big this catalog is going to get, especially if you have a long and fruitful life, as I hope that you do. But
Thank you.
thank you so much for being our special guest here on Gray Matter.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks, Leighton. God bless you and your viewers.
Hungry for truth beyond the television? Well, extend the conversation with Gray Matter online. Gray Matter's insights continue in your inbox. Subscribe to our Substack newsletter where we dive deeper into the spiritual battles facing Canadian families today. Equip yourself to stand firm in your faith and lead with godly wisdom. Join our growing community of truth seekers at substack.com/graymatter newsletter. Subscribe today and never miss the Canadian perspective on what matters most. If you value the conversations we have here every week on Gray Matter, then you know the cultural and legal battles we're facing aren't just political, they're spiritual, and they're fighting the very foundations of Western civilization. If you're ready for an uncompromising, legally precise defense of our civil liberties, our traditional values, and the rule of law, Leighton's new book, Trials, Tribulations, and Truth, was written for you. Join the defense. Grab your copy of Trials, Tribulations, and Truth on Amazon right now by clicking the link in the show notes, or go to thegraymatterpodcast.com. The battle has always been over people and ideas, but they're just the targets. The real enemies are spiritual principalities and powers. Gray Matter's purpose is to reach out with the voice of Christian truth to men between 18 and 44. We believe that these sons and fathers are Christ's inheritance. Join us financially and help us to speak so Canadians hear truth that sets men free and brings families to Jesus. Contact us by email at graymatterconnect@gmail.com or mail us at Post Office Box 2436, Fort Macleod, Alberta, postal code T0L0Z0. Thank you for your support.